Blood tastes like copper and failure. That was my last thought before my heart gave out on the office floor, crushed under a 30 million corporate debt that was never mine. When I opened my eyes, the calendar had rolled back 5 years. My father was dead again. The will was about to be read, and this time, when my golden child sister screamed that she deserved the family empire, I was going to hand her the pen, watch her drown. The carpet under my cheek was industrial grade, rough and smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. I knew this smell. I knew the exact knot of pain radiating down my left arm, the crushing weight sitting square on my sternum. I was dying. 32 years old, subsisting on antacids, and 4 hours of sleep a night, trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. Then came the jolt. It wasn't a flash of white light or a sudden choir of angels. It felt like someone had violently yanked me backward by the collar of my shirt. The hum of the fluorescent office lights snapped out of existence. The sharp, agonizing pressure in my chest vanished, replaced by the sudden, desperate need to inhale. I gasped, my lungs pulling in air that tasted of dust and wilted lies. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't on the floor of the accounting department. I was sitting upright in a high-backed mahogany chair. The fabric of my dress was stiff, scratchy wool, morning clothes. The heavy, oppressive silence of the room was broken only by the synchronized ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, and the wet, dramatic sniffles of my mother Sylvia sitting to my right. I blinked hard. The room swam into focus. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that had never been read. Across the wide, polished expanse of the desk sat Gerald Henderson, my father's attorney, looking over the top of his half-moon reading glasses, and sitting to my left, radiating an aura of impatient entitlement, was my younger sister Cindy. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my veins. I looked down at my hands. They were smooth, the deep purple bags under my eyes that had become permanent fixtures in my reflection were gone. I could feel the tautness of my skin. My fingernails weren't chewed down to the quick. It was May 14th, 5 years ago, the day our father's will was read. I had died. I knew I had died. The memory of my heart tearing itself apart was too vivid. The taste of blood too real. Yet here I was, breathing my pulse, a frantic but healthy rhythm against my throat. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in the back of my throat, but I swallowed it down. It tasted like bile. "Robin," Mr. Henderson's voice was gentle, the kind of voice you use to soothe a startled horse. "Are you all right? We can take a break if the grief is too much." Grief, the word echoed in my head, hollow and absurd. I didn't feel grief for Arthur Stone. In my first life, I had wept in this chair. I had felt the crushing burden of a daughter's duty. My father had built Stone Logistics from the ground up, or so the myth went. He was a man of bespoke suits, imported cigars, and a booming laugh that could fill a ballroom. He was also a fraud. "I'm fine," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, lighter, lacking the raspy exhaustion that had defined my last 5 years. "Please continue." Cindy sighed loudly, crossing her legs. The friction of her expensive silk stockings made a quiet hiss. Even in mourning, Cindy looked like she was waiting for a photographer to ask who she was wearing. Her black dress was tailored to within a millimeter of its life, a discreet diamond pendant resting at the base of her throat. "Honestly, Robin," Cindy muttered, not bothering to lower her voice, "try to hold it together. We have a luncheon to attend after this, and I can't have you looking like a drowned rat in front of the board." In the previous life, that comment had stung. I had shrunk into my cheap wool dress and nodded. Now I just looked at her. Really looked at her. Her pout was perfectly glossed, her eyes dry as a bone darted impatiently toward the thick manila folder on Henderson's desk. She didn't care that the man who raised us was currently sitting in a decorative urn on a mantel across town. She only cared about what was inside that folder. She wanted the crown. I leaned back in my chair. The leather creaked. "Go ahead, Gerald," I said, ignoring her completely. Henderson cleared his throat, shuffling the heavy cream-colored papers. As I was saying, Arthur's estate is divided into two primary assets: the liquid capital currently held in the Stone Family Trust, and the controlling shares of Stone Logistics, including the corporate headquarters and the active fleet. I watched Cindy's posture stiffen like a hound catching the scent of blood. I knew the script by heart. In the original timeline, Arthur had left the liquid cash about $4 million to Cindy and Sylvia. To me, his steady, reliable eldest daughter. He had left the company, the legacy. What he hadn't left me was the truth. Stone Logistics was a hollowed-out corpse. Arthur had re-mortgaged the headquarters 3 times. The fleet was leased, not owned. He owed $15 million to a syndicate of aggressive private equity sharks, and another 10 to overseas creditors who didn't use lawyers when they wanted their money back. He had structured the loans so that the debt was tied entirely to the controlling shares. Whoever inherited the company inherited the noose. I had spent 5 years working 18-hour days, liquidating my own assets, destroying my health, all to keep the creditors from taking everything and throwing my mother and sister onto the street. And what had Cindy done? She had taken her millions, bought a villa in Tuscany, and complained that my dividend checks were late. Not this time. My heart beat a steady, fierce rhythm against my ribs. The scent of stale lies and lemon polish suddenly smelled like freedom. To my youngest daughter, Cindy Stone, Henderson read his voice, taking on the formal cadence of legal recitation. I leave the entirety of the Stone family, trust to be distributed. "Wait," Cindy interrupted. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy air of the room. Henderson paused, lowering the paper. "Excuse me?" Cindy leaned forward, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the mahogany desk. "The trust? That's just the cash accounts. What about the company? What about the shares?" Sylvia patted Cindy's arm nervously. "Darling, let Mr. Henderson finish." "No, Mom." Cindy snapped her perfectly plucked eyebrows, drawing together. "Dad promised me. He said I was the face of this family. I have the marketing degree. I have the connections. Robin just sits in a cubicle doing data entry. I am the director of operations, Cindy." I corrected mildly. The words felt like ash in my mouth, but I needed to play my part. I needed her to want it. "Whatever," she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. You're a glorified accountant. Dad's company needs a visionary to take over. It's a $50 million enterprise. You can't honestly tell me. He left his legacy to someone who buys her shoes off the rack. I looked down at my scuffed black pumps. They were sensible. In my past life, I had died wearing them. I forced my hands to tremble slightly. I looked up at Henderson, widening my eyes to feign panic. Gerald, Dad, and I talked about this. He said he needed someone practical to handle the logistics. Cindy's eyes narrowed. She smelled blood in the water. My blood. Dad was sick, Robin, Cindy said, her voice dropping an octave, trying to sound authoritative, but coming off venomous. He wasn't thinking clearly at the end. You manipulated him because you were always at the office while I was actually out networking for us. I bit the inside of my cheek hard. The sharp sting of pain helped me keep a straight face. She was doing the work for me. She was walking right into the trap, demanding to lock herself inside it. The grandfather clock ticked loudly. Tick, talk. Each second felt heavy, thick with the unsaid tension in the room. Henderson sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Cindy, the will is legally binding. Your father was of sound mind. He explicitly designated the distribution of assets. Robin receives the controlling shares of Stone Logistics. You receive the trust. I'll contest it, Cindy said instantly. She didn't even blink. Sylvia gasped softly, pressing a crumpled tissue to her mouth. Cindy, please. Your father isn't even in the ground yet. Mom, be quiet, Cindy snapped, not taking her eyes off Henderson. I mean it, Gerald. I will tie this estate up in probate for the next decade. I'll drag Robin through court until she's bankrupt, just paying the legal fees. That company is mine. It's my birthright. I looked at my sister. The sheer blinding arrogance of her. She had never spent a single day looking at a ledger. She didn't know the difference between gross margin and net profit. She just saw the glossy, high-rise building downtown with our name on it, the private boxes at the opera, the difference of the Betrayal at the country club. She thought Arthur's wealth was magic, an endless well of gold coins. Still, Cindy? I said, keeping my voice low, injecting a slight quiver into it. You don't know how to run a shipping company. It's complicated. The contracts, the unions. Oh, please. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You hire people for the boring stuff. I'm the CEO. I make the decisions. You're just jealous because Dad always liked me best. And you know, I'll double the company's valuation in a year, while you'd run it into the ground. I looked at Sylvia. Mom, are you going to let her do this? Sylvia looked away, her gaze fixing on the spine of a leather-bound encyclopedia on the wall. Robin, darling, maybe Cindy has a point. You've always been so high-rung. The stress of running the whole company might be too much for you. Cindy has so much energy, and you would still get the trust. The trust. $4 million. Clear, unencumbered, liquid cash. In my first life, I had rejected the idea of taking the cash. I felt a pathological loyalty to the family name. I believed Arthur when he told me on his deathbed that I was the only one strong enough to hold the family together. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I had swallowed it whole. I looked down at my lap. I dug my fingernails into my palms until I felt a dull ache forcing a flush to rise to my cheeks. When I looked up, my eyes were bright with unshed, manufactured tears. "Gerald," I said softly, if I were to step aside, if I renounced my claim to the shares, what happens?" Henderson frowned, leaning forward. His chair groaned in protest. "Robin, I strongly advise against making emotional decisions today. This is a massive transfer of assets. Just answer the question, Gerald," Cindy demanded, tapping her heel against the thick Persian rug. Tap, tap, tap. If Robin formally renounces her inheritance of the company shares, Henderson said slowly, clearly displeased, and signs a waiver of succession, the shares would default to the secondary beneficiary named in the clause. That would be you, Cindy. However, to keep the asset distribution equitable under the terms of the estate, you would have to forfeit your claim to the liquid trust to Robin. Cindy paused. I could almost see the gears grinding behind her perfectly contoured forehead. 4 million in cash versus a company she believed was worth 50 million plus. The title, the power, and the prestige. It wasn't even a contest in her mind. "Fine," Cindy said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "She can have the pocket change." "I'll take the empire, Cindy." Henderson warned, his tone darkening. "You need to understand, taking controlling interest of a corporation, like Stone Logistics, isn't just about assets. You assume all liabilities attached to those shares. There are complexities to your father's finances." He was trying to warn her. Henderson knew. He didn't know the full extent of the rot. No one did, except Arthur and the creditors. But he knew enough to see the cracks in the foundation. My heart stalled for a fraction of a second. If Henderson pushed too hard, if he laid out the ledgers right here, Cindy might back out. She was greedy, but she was also a coward when it came to real work. I had to play the final card. I stood up abruptly. The chair skeeted backward, scraping harshly against the wood floor beneath the rug. "You want it?" I yelled. The raw emotion wasn't entirely faked. It was a release of 5 years of suppressed rage, channeled perfectly into the present moment. "Fine. Take it, Cindy. Take the company. Take the late nights, the stress, the headaches. You think it's just fancy dinners and ribbon cutings? You wouldn't last a week in my office." Cindy stood up to meet me, her eyes flashing with triumphant venom. "Watch me. You're just terrified that I'm going to prove how useless you've been all these years. Hand over the papers, Gerald." "Robin," Sylvia whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. I pulled away, wrapping my arms around myself, playing the part of the wounded, defeated older sister. "Draft the renunciation, Gerald. I'm done fighting. If she wants to ruin herself trying to play CEO, I won't stop her." Henderson looked between us. He was a lawyer, not a family therapist. He billed by the hour, and he had seen enough wealthy families tear each other apart to know when a battle was over. He exhaled a long, tired breath that ruffled the papers on his desk. "Very well," he said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad and a silver fountain pen. Clear's throat. "I will have my clerks draft the formal transfer and renunciation waivers. We can execute them right now. But I wanted on the record that I advised caution." "Noted," Cindy said cheerfully, sitting back down and crossing her legs again. She looked at me, a smirk playing on her lips. Don't worry, Robin. I'll make sure they give you a good severance package when I restructure your department. I looked at her. I looked at the smug satisfaction radiating from her pores. Thank you, Cindy, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You have no idea what you're taking on. Literally. The drafting took 45 minutes. I spent that time staring out the window of Henderson's office, watching the grey clouds gather over the city skyline. It was going to rain. In my past life, it had rained too. I remembered walking out of this building, clutching a leather briefcase containing the company's operating agreements, feeling the rain soak through my thin wool coat, the crushing weight of Arthur's legacy already bowing my shoulders. Behind me, I could hear Cindy loudly texting the frantic clicking of her acrylic nails against her phone screen. She was probably already updating her LinkedIn profile. CEO of Stone Logistics. Sylvia sat in silence, sipping tepid water from a paper cup. She had gotten what she wanted, avoiding conflict. Sylvia's entire survival strategy in life was to appease the loudest voice in the room. Right now, that was Cindy. Soon it would be the debt collectors. I felt a brief flicker of pity for my mother, but I snuffed it out. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. Pity had killed me. The documents are ready, Henderson announced, breaking the silence. A paralegal had slipped into the room, placing 2 thick stacks of freshly printed paper on the mahogany desk. The smell of hot toner cut through the musty air. I turned away from the window. My legs felt strangely light, as if gravity had lessened its grip on me. I walked over to the desk. This is the renunciation of succession for the corporate shares, Henderson said, tapping the first stack. He looked at me, his eyes grave. By signing this, Robin, you relinquish all legal claims, voting rights, and equity in Stone Logistics. In exchange, as per the verbal agreement witnessed today, you will receive sole ownership of the Stone Family Trust, totaling 4.2 million post-tax. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the heavy silver fountain pen. The metal was cool against my skin. It felt heavy, real. I pressed the nib to the thick, textured paper. The ink flowed smoothly, dark blue, impermanent Robin Stone. I signed my name, the looping letters sealing my fate. I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt a phantom pressure lift from my chest, a physical unspooling of tension in my neck. I slid the paper across the desk. Cindy practically snatched the pen from my hand. She didn't bother reading the clauses. She didn't look at the section outlining liability transfers. She just flipped to the back page and signed her name with an exaggerated flourish, underlining it twice. There, she said, dropping the pen onto the desk with a sharp clack. It's done. Henderson gathered the papers, his face a mask of professional detachment. The transfer is legally binding. I will file these with the probate court by the end of the day. Cindy, you are now the majority shareholder and acting chief executive of Stone Logistics. Cindy stood up, smoothing the front of her dress. She turned to me, her posture entirely transformed. She wasn't just my spoiled younger sister anymore. She was my boss, or so she thought. I think it's best if we make this a clean break. Go, Cindy said, her voice, adopting an icy, faux corporate tone she'd probably learned from watching television. Your emotional outburst today proves you aren't stable enough to handle the transition. Consider your employment at Stone Logistics terminated effective immediately. Sylvia gasped. Cindy, your own sister. It's business, Mum, Cindy said coldly. We need fresh blood. Robin represents the old, stagnant way of doing things. I'll need her office cleared out by 5. I stared at her. The audacity was almost beautiful in its purity. She was firing me from a company that by Friday would bounce its payroll checks. Of course, I said smoothly. I wouldn't dream of standing in your way. I picked up my purse from the floor, a cheap faux leather thing. I wouldn't need it much longer. $4, $2 million was sitting in a trust waiting for me. It wasn't billionaire money, but it was enough to disappear. Enough to buy a small house somewhere quiet, somewhere. The name Arthur Stone meant nothing. Goodbye, Mom, I said, leaning down to kiss Sylvia's cheek. Her skin smelled of stale powder and anxiety. I didn't say goodbye to Cindy. I just turned and walked toward the heavy oak door. Oh, Robin, Cindy called out just as I reached the handle. I paused, looking back over my shoulder. She was leaning against Henderson's desk, looking like a cat that had swallowed a canary. Leave the company car keys with reception. You can take a taxi home. A genuine smile, the first real smile I had worn in 5 years, cracked across my face. It felt unfamiliar, stretching muscles that had forgotten how to work. Keep the car, Cindy, I said softly. You're going to need it. I opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The thick carpet muffled my footsteps. I pressed the button for the elevator, watching the numbers descend. When the doors opened, I stepped inside entirely alone. As the elevator plummeted toward the ground floor, my ears popped. I closed my eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. The air in the elevator smelled like ozone and floor wax, but to me it was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I was alive, I was rich, and I was free. Upstairs, Cindy was currently the proud owner of $30 million of toxic debt tied to Russian mobsters in predatory equity firms who broke kneecaps for missed interest payments. Watch her drown. The elevator pinged. The doors slid open to the lobby. Outside the glass doors, the rain had finally begun to fall, washing the filthy city streets clean. I stepped out into the downpour, not bothering to open my umbrella, letting the freezing water shock my skin, washing away the ghost of a life that was no longer mine. The packing tape made a sharp, violent screech as I pulled it across the top of the cardboard box. My office at Stone Logistics didn't look like the nerve center of a $50 million empire. It looked like a bunker. The fluorescent overhead lights emitted a high-pitched, mosquito-like whine that I used to tune out, but now it grated against my eardrums. The air smelled of burnt break-room coffee and the metallic tang of overheated servers. I was packing light. My frame degree, a ceramic mug Sylvia had painted for me a decade ago, chipped at the rim, a comfortable ergonomic mouse I had bought with my own money. Everything else, the files, the binders, the mahogany pen set Arthur had given me when I made director. I left on the desk. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. It stuck, requiring a hard jerk that bruised my hip against the desk edge. Inside sat a single unassuming black binder. In my first life, I had opened that binder on a Tuesday at 200 a.m., my eyes burning with exhaustion. That was when I found the shadow ledgers. That was when I discovered the 3 mortgages, the $15 million balloon payment due to a private equity firm in Chicago, and the offshore accounts bleeding interest to a syndicate in Macau. I had vomited into my wastebasket that night. Now I just stared at the textured black vinyl of the spine. I didn't touch it. It felt radioactive. It belonged to Cindy now. Robin? I jumped slightly, turning around. Standing in the doorway was David, the head of accounting. He was 50, possessed a permanent stoop, and wore a tie with a faded mustard stain near the knot. He looked at my cardboard box, his pale eyes wide with confusion behind thick wire-rimmed glasses. "What's going on?" he asked. His voice was a dry rasp. "HR just locked your employee portal. I thought it was an IT glitch." I leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing my arms. "Not a glitch, David." Cindy took the controlling chairs. "I've been terminated." David's jaw actually dropped. He took a step into the room, glancing nervously over his shoulder, as if Cindy might be lurking in the acoustic ceiling tiles. "Cindy? But she doesn't know the first thing about... she asked me last week if we could expense her new Pomeranian as a security asset." A harsh laugh scraped its way out of my throat. "Well, she's the CEO now." David rubbed his face. His skin looked grey. The deep lines around his mouth, carved by years of managing Arthur's chaotic cash flow. He didn't know the full extent of the debt Arthur had kept the shadow ledgers hidden, even from him. But David knew we were constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul. "Robin, we have payroll next Thursday," David whispered, stepping closer. "The operating account is short by 80 grand. I was going to ask you to authorize a draw from the emergency line of credit." "I can't authorize anything anymore," I said. The detachment in my own voice scared me a little. In my past life, David's panic would have become my panic. I would have skipped meals, sold my own car, done whatever it took to make sure the warehouse guys got their checks. Now I felt a thick, calloused wall between his anxiety and my pulse. "You need to take that to Cindy," I told him. "She won't know what to do," he pleaded. I looked at David. I remembered him coming to my funeral in the other timeline, looking older, broken by the stress of the bankruptcy. A flash of guilt, hot and uncomfortable, pinched my stomach. I couldn't save the company. It was already dead, but I could maybe save him. "David," I said quietly, locking eyes with him. "Update your resume today." He blinked. "What?" "Check the severance clause in your contract." I continued, keeping my voice low. "If you resign due to a change in executive leadership, you're entitled to 3 months' pay. File the paperwork tomorrow morning before the operating accounts dry up completely. Get out." David stared at me. He looked at the black binder in the open drawer, then back up to my face. The gears clicked into place. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "How bad is it?" "Worse than you think," I said. I picked up my box. "Good luck, David." I walked past him, out into the bullpen. The phones were ringing a discordant symphony of blinking red lights and demanding clients. The dispatchers were yelling over the partitions. It was the sound of a machine eating itself alive. I walked out the glass double doors, handed my access badge and the keys to the company Lexus to the bewildered receptionist, and took the elevator down to the lobby. The rain had stopped leaving the sidewalks, slick and smelling of wet concrete and exhaust. I hailed a cab. The vinyl seat was sticky, and the cab smelled strongly of cheap pine air freshener and cigarette smoke. It was the most wonderful smell in the world. "Where to, lady?" The driver grunted. "Just drive," I said, leaning my head back against the window. "Take me to a bank." It took 3 weeks for the money to clear. The probate process was expedited because Cindy had hired a team of aggressive, overpriced corporate lawyers to push the paperwork through. She was terrified I would change my mind. She wanted the throne secured. I spent those 3 weeks living in a state of suspended animation. I rented a small, furnished apartment on the edge of the city, far from the polished high-rises and country clubs of Arthur's world. The couch was scratchy polyester, and the water pressure in the shower was dismal. I loved it. I slept. I slept for 10, sometimes 12 hours a night. I woke up without the phantom pressure on my chest. I drank cheap drip coffee on a tiny balcony overlooking a noisy intersection, letting the roar of traffic wash over me. I wasn't running a dying empire. I was just a woman drinking coffee. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 22 days after the will reading, my phone buzzed on the cheap laminate kitchen counter. It was an alert from my banking app. I set my mug down. The ceramic clicked against the counter. My fingers were slightly cold as I picked up the phone, swiping the screen to unlock it. The facial recognition failed, probably because I wasn't scowling with stress anymore. So I punched in my passcode. The screen loaded. Available balance $4,215,000. I stared at the numbers. The zeros stretched across the screen, pristine and absolute. It wasn't the kind of money that bought private islands, but it was you money. It was, I never have to look at a spreadsheet again money. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A hysterical, raw laugh ripped out of my throat, echoing in the small kitchen. I leaned over the sink, gripping the cold aluminum edges, laughing until tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I was safe. The crushing debt, the heart attack on the rough commercial carpet. It couldn't touch me here. My phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. It wasn't a bank alert this time. It was an email notification. My old industry contacts still had my personal email address. It was a newsletter from a local business syndicate. Subject: A new era for Stone Logistics. Cindy Stone takes the helm. I tapped the email. A high-resolution photo loaded. It was Cindy. She was standing in the atrium of the Stone Logistics headquarters, holding a flute of champagne. She was wearing a white designer suit that probably cost more than the dispatchers made in a month. Behind her, a massive new banner hung from the ceiling, featuring a sleek, modernized, and highly expensive new company logo. I read the copy. Newly appointed CEO Cindy Stone celebrated her succession last night with a lavish rebranding gala. Stone Logistics needs to step into the 21st century. Stone announced. We are pivoting towards a high-end luxury logistics model. The old ways of doing things are over. Industry insiders estimate the rebranding campaign alone cost upwards of $300,000. $300,000. I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples. The operating account had been short by 80 grand when I left. She hadn't just drained whatever meager reserves David had managed to scrape together. She had tapped into the high-interest credit lines to throw a party. In my previous life, the end of the month was when the Macau syndicate expected their quarterly interest payment. It was $1, $2 million in cash, wired through a shell corporation in the Caymans. If the payment was late, the interest compounded daily. If it was a week late, they stopped calling and started visiting. Today was the 28th. The payment was due in 3 days. I felt a ghost of a twinge in my left arm, a memory of the heart attack. I forced myself to open my eyes, look at the peeling paint on my apartment wall, and ground myself in the present. Not my circus, not my monkeys. I tossed the phone onto the couch and walked to the fridge to see if I had any eggs left. The silence of the apartment was shattered by a sharp, jarring ringtone. I froze the refrigerator door half open, a blast of cold air hitting my bare legs. I didn't recognize the ringtone. It was the default chime for a number, not in my contacts. I let it ring 3 times. The sound scraped against my nerves. Finally, I walked over to the couch and picked it up. It was a blocked number. I hesitated. Common sense told me to let it go to voicemail, but a morbid, deeply ingrained curiosity, the part of me that had spent 5 years putting out Arthur's fires, forced my thumb to swipe the green icon. "Hello," I said. My voice was steady, but my stomach tightened. Robin Stone. The voice on the other end was male, thick, with a heavy Eastern European accent. It didn't sound angry. It sounded like gravel grinding against steel. Professional, bored, dangerous. Steve speaking. I lied automatically. I could have said it was the wrong number, but I needed to know where the dominoes were falling. "This is Victor," the man said. The line was incredibly clear, free of static. "I'm calling regarding your father's account. We have not received the quarterly confirmation. The wire transfer is uninitiated." My mouth went dry. Arthur's offshore creditors. They still thought I was the point of contact. They hadn't read the glossy business newsletters. "I'm sorry, Victor," I said, keeping my tone perfectly polite. "The way you speak to a venomous snake you find in your garden. You have outdated information. Arthur Stone passed away last month." A brief pause. "My condolences. The debt, however, does not pass away." "Who is handling the estate?" The controlling shares of Stone Logistics and all associated liabilities were legally transferred 3 weeks ago, I stated, reciting the legal reality like a shield. "I am no longer affiliated with the company. I have 0 equity and 0 legal authority." "Is that so?" Victor murmured. The quiet rustle of paper came through the speaker. "And who signed for these shares?" "The new chief executive officer is Cindy Stone," I said. The name tasted like ash, but I pushed it out. "You'll have to direct all inquiries to her." "Cindy Stone," Victor repeated. He pronounced it slowly, testing the syllables. We do not have a Cindy Stone in our files. This is a very large sum, Robin. We do not like administrative confusion. The probate documents are public record, I said, my voice hardening. Call her at the corporate office. She's in charge now. I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly. I placed the phone back on the counter, staring at it as if it might explode. It had begun. The trap was sprung. Cindy wanted the throne. She had the title, the corner office, the new logo, and the champagne. But Victor wasn't going to care about her marketing degree. He wasn't going to be charmed by her bespoke suits. He wanted his 1.2 million. I pictured Cindy sitting in my old office, probably picking out new ergonomic chairs from a catalogue, completely unaware that a man named Victor was currently dialing the front desk, asking for the CEO. A slow, dark smile curled the edges of my mouth. I picked up my cold mug of coffee and took a sip. It tasted bitter and absolutely perfect. The collapse didn't make the evening news. Corporate rot is quiet. It happens in bounced checks, locked gates, and disconnected phone lines. I tracked the decay through the logistics forums and the frantic, hushed text messages from my former warehouse manager, Gary. Fuel cards declined. Drivers stranded in Ohio. Vendor threatening a lien. 9 days after Victor called, someone knocked on my apartment door. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, irregular pounding that rattled the cheap brass hinges. I set my lukewarm tea on the coffee table. I didn't rush. The wood laminate floor felt cold against my bare feet. When I peered through the scratched peephole, the fisheye lens distorted her face, but the panic was unmistakable. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Cindy stood in the hallway. The fluorescent overhead light buzzed, casting sickly yellow shadows over her features. She looked like she had aged 5 years in 2 weeks. Her designer trench coat was wrinkled. Her hair, usually a flawless blowout, was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. But it was the smell that hit me first. She smelled of expensive Santal perfume, sour sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of pure adrenaline. "You changed your number," she rasped, pushing past me into the small apartment without an invitation. "I wanted privacy," I said, leaving the door cracked open. "What do you want, Cindy?" She spun around her heels, digging into my cheap polyester rug. Her eyes were bloodshot. The manicured nails she had used to eagerly sign away her life were chipped. "What did you do?" she demanded. Her voice cracked, lacking its usual shrill authority. "I made a cup of tea," I said, leaning against the door frame. "You're interrupting." "Stop it," she screamed. The sound echoed off the bare walls. She shoved a crumpled piece of paper toward my chest. "Stop playing games." The bank froze the operating accounts. Half the fleet is sitting in a way station in Nevada because the toll transponders are dead, and some man named Victor left a voicemail on my personal cell phone, telling me I have 48 hours to wire 1.2 million. She was hyperventilating. Her chest heaved, pulling tight against the wrinkled silk of her blouse. "That sounds like a cash flow issue," I said mildly. "You're the CEO. Reallocate the funds." "There are no funds," she shrieked, her hands tearing at her own hair. I looked at the shadow ledgers. "Robin, I found the file on your hard drive. Dad owed $30 million. We don't own the building. We don't own the trucks. The company is completely bankrupt. Yes, the single word dropped between us like a lead weight. Cindy froze. The frantic movement of her hands stopped. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, a thin string of saliva catching on her bottom lip. The realization hit her, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a slow, agonizing suffocation. "You knew," she whispered. The blood drained from her face, leaving her a sickly gray. "You knew when we were in Henderson's office. You knew it was a trap." "Dad laid the trap, Cindy," I corrected her softly. "He built a house of cards and demanded I hold it up until it crushed me. I just finally stepped out of the way. You're the one who begged to take my place." She lunged at me. It wasn't a calculated strike. It was pure animalistic desperation. Her manicured hands clawed at my neck. I didn't flinch. I caught her wrists. 5 years of hauling archive boxes and working through a heart condition had given me a hardened, wiry strength she lacked. I twisted her arms down and pushed her back. She stumbled her heel, catching on the edge of the rug, and fell hard onto the scratchy couch. "You have to fix this," she sobbed, the fight instantly draining out of her. She curled into herself, pulling her knees to her chest. "Robin, please. You know the accounts. You know these people. Call Victor. Tell him it was a mistake. Give me the trust money. We can pay the interest. Keep them off our backs." I looked down at her. This was the golden child, the sister who had mocked my cheap shoes, who had spent my sanity to fund her Tuscan vacations, who had fired me with a smug smile. "The trust money is mine," I said, my voice empty of any warmth. "I signed the renunciation. You signed the liability transfer. It's legally ironclad." "They'll kill me," she choked out, burying her face in her hands. "Victor said he said things. Robin, he knows where I live." "Then sell your house." I said, "Liquidate your jewelry. File for Chapter 11. Or better yet, use that marketing degree and spin this into a positive PR campaign." She looked up at me, tears cutting clean tracks through her foundation. "You're a monster." "No," I replied, walking to the door and pulling it wide open. "I'm just a glorified accountant. Get out of my apartment." She didn't argue. The absolute coldness in my eyes must have finally pierced through her delusion. She staggered to her feet, clutching her stomach as if she might be sick, and stumbled out into the hallway. I closed the door. The deadbolt clicked into place with a satisfying heavy thud. I walked back to my lukewarm tea, sat down, and drank it in perfect silence. The implosion went public 3 days later. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was at the grocery store squeezing an avocado under the harsh fluorescent lights of the produce aisle. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A news alert. Breaking Federal Marshal's raid. Stone Logistics HQ CEO detained. I dropped the avocado. It hit the linoleum floor with a dull thud. I pulled out my phone and tapped the link. The local news station was streaming a live feed from a helicopter hovering over the industrial park downtown. The screen showed the glossy glass facade of the building where I had bled for 5 years. The massive new banner Cindy had commissioned, the one that cost $300,000, was tearing at the corner, flapping pathetically in the wind. A line of black SUVs blocked the main entrance. Men in tactical vests with U.S. Marshal printed in bold yellow letters across their backs were carrying out cardboard boxes. The same cheap boxes I had packed my mug into. The camera zoomed in on the glass double doors. 2 marshals emerged, flanking a figure. It was Cindy. She wasn't wearing a bespoke suit today. She was wearing grey sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. Her hands were cuffed in front of her. She was fighting, twisting her shoulders, screaming something the microphone couldn't pick up over the roar of the helicopter blades. The camera caught her face. It was twisted in absolute terror. The caption scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Stone Logistics assets seized amidst fraud and extortion probe. Ties to organized crime suspected. Victor hadn't just threatened her. When the payment didn't arrive, the Macau syndicate didn't bother breaking kneecaps. They cut their losses. They tipped off the feds to the shadow ledgers, using Arthur's sloppy shell corporations as a sacrificial lamb to protect their larger operations. Cindy had inherited the debt. But by signing the papers, she had also legally inherited the fraud, the cooked books, the falsified tax returns. She was the acting CEO of a criminal enterprise. I pushed my shopping cart into a corner, abandoning it. The air in the grocery store suddenly felt thick, smelling of synthetic citrus floor cleaner and overripe bananas. My heart was pounding a hard, steady rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't the frantic, tearing pain of my past life. It was the heavy, thudding drumbeat of closure. I walked out of the store into the bright afternoon sun. The heat baked the asphalt of the parking lot. My phone rang. The caller ID flashed Sylvia Stone. I let it ring. The phone buzzed against my palm. A frantic, vibrating plea. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. I swiped to answer. Robin? Sylvia's voice was a hysterical screech, completely devoid of her usual country club poise. Robin, thank God. Have you seen the news? They took her. They put handcuffs on her like an animal. I saw Mum. You have to call Henderson, Sylvia cried. The sound of glass shattering echoed in the background. She was dropping things, tearing her house apart in a panic. Tell them to fix this. Give them the trust money, Robin. Pay the bail. She's your sister. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still next to the rusted fender of a parked sedan. Mum, listen to me very carefully, I said. My voice was low, devoid of inflection. The trust money is in a secure offshore account under my name alone. I am not paying her bail. I am not calling Henderson. I am not sinking my life into Arthur's grave. You can't do this, Sylvia shrieked. She's going to prison, Robin. They're saying she committed fraud. She did, I replied. She signed the documents, claiming full responsibility for the company's financial history. She wanted the title. She got it. But she didn't know. Sylvia sobbed. You knew you set her up. I offered her the truth, and she called me a liar. I said the memory of her smug face in the lawyer's office flashing behind my eyes. She fired me. She took the keys to the company car and told me to take a taxi. She made her bed. Mum, now she has to sleep in a cell. I'll disown you, Sylvia screamed. I'll tell the police you manipulated her. Tell them whatever you want. I said softly. But Mum, when the feds finish auditing the company, they're going to look at your personal accounts next. They're going to see the hundreds of thousands Arthur funneled to you from the business loans. If I were you, I'd stop calling me and start packing a bag. I ended the call. I didn't block the number. I simply turned the phone off. The black screen reflected my face. I looked older than 32, but my eyes were clear. The permanent exhaustion that had haunted my features for 5 years was gone. I slipped the dead phone into my pocket. I had a flight to catch in 3 hours. A one-way ticket to a coast where the water was warm, and no one knew my last name. Arthur Stone's legacy was finally indeed, and I was the only one who survived the funeral. The sun here didn't care about corporate hierarchy. It beat down on the cracked terracotta tiles of my patio with a heavy, indifferent heat. I sat in a woven rattan chair that groaned in protest every time I shifted breathing in the scent of roasting garlic from the neighbor's kitchen and the sharp iodine tang of the sea. I was 6,000 meters from the glass high-rises of my past life. My bare feet rested on the warm stone. The skin on my shoulders was peeling slightly from yesterday's sunburn, a persistent, itchy sting that I welcomed. It was a physical reminder that I was here existing in a body that wasn't failing. Yet the ghost of my death still haunted me at least 3 times a day. Usually when the house was too quiet, my hand would drift to my neck. 2 fingers pressed against my carotid artery. Thump, thump, thump. I would sit there counting the beats, waiting for the sudden, violent stutter that had preceded my heart, tearing itself apart on that rough industrial carpet. The stutter never came. I was 32, healthy, and aggressively unemployed. I picked up the tablet resting on the small row iron table beside my iced coffee. The glass was sweating, leaving a ring of condensation on the metal. I wiped my damp fingers on my linen shorts and tapped the screen awake. I didn't seek out the news every day anymore, but today was different. Today was sentencing. The headline was buried in the digital pages of a mid-tier financial chronicle. The media had lost interest in the Stone family once the initial shock value of the raid faded. We weren't billionaires. We were just a $50 million shell game. Former CEO Cindy Stone sentenced to 41 months in federal facility. I tapped the article. There was no video this time, just a sterile courtroom sketch. The artist had captured the severe slope of Cindy's shoulders, the way she was slumped over the defense table. She had taken a plea deal. The federal prosecutors had buried her under mountains of Arthur's shadow ledgers, forged signatures, and wire fraud records. Her high-priced defense team, entirely out of their depth against a RICO investigation, had bled the last of Sylvia's personal savings, dry before advising Cindy to plead guilty to 3 counts of corporate negligence and wire fraud. Victor and his syndicate had vanished like smoke. They always did. They left Cindy, holding the bag, the sole signatory on the rotting corpse of Stone Logistics. I scrolled down. The text was dry, detailing the liquidation of assets to pay back the private equity firms. The building was gone. The fleet was auctioned off at pennies on the dollar. Then a small paragraph near the bottom caught my eye. Sylvia Stone, widow of founder Arthur Stone, has filed for personal bankruptcy. Court records show the estate's remaining assets, including the family's primary residence, have been seized to satisfy outstanding liens. I locked the tablet. The screen went black, reflecting my face. My hair was longer now, lightened by the sun, curled by the salt air. The dark, bruised bags under my eyes were a memory. A hollow ache bloomed behind my ribs. It wasn't regret. Regret implied I wished I had done things differently. If I had taken the company, it would be my face in that courtroom sketch. It would be my body rotting in a federal holding cell. My heart finally giving out on a steel cot instead of an office floor. But the victory tasted metallic. I had survived, but I was standing in the ashes of the only family I had ever known. I stood up the chair, scraping against the tiles. I walked into the small kitchen. It smelled of ripe lemons and old wood. I poured the rest of my iced coffee down the stainless steel sink, watching the dark liquid spiral down the drain. Arthur had built a black hole. He had fed his life into it, his morals, his family. He had disguised it as an empire and handed me the crown, fully expecting me to let it consume me to protect his ego. I grabbed a bottle of cheap local red wine from the counter and wrenched the cork out. I didn't bother with a glass. I took a long swallow straight from the bottle. The wine was dry, acidic, and tasted faintly of dirt. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was an email from Gerald Henderson. I hadn't spoken to the lawyer since the day I walked out of his office. I stared at his name glowing on the screen. He was the last tether, the last thread connecting me to the wreckage. I set the wine bottle down my hand, shaking just a fraction of an inch, and opened the message. Rob in the email read, "I am writing to inform you that the probate and subsequent criminal forfeit regarding your father's estate and Stone Logistics have officially concluded. I have been instructed by your mother, Sylvia, to pass along a letter. She mailed it to my office 3 weeks ago. I am forwarding a scanned copy attached below. For the record, Robin, I have practiced law for 40 years. I have seen families tear each other to pieces for pennies. What you did, stepping away when you did. I don't know if it was luck, or if you knew something the rest of us didn't. But you are the only one who walked out of this alive. Do not reply to this email. I am retiring at the end of the month. Regards, Gerald Henderson." I stared at the screen. My throat felt tight, dry as sandpaper. I scrolled down to the PDF attachment. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the file. I could delete it. I could throw the phone into the ocean and never look back. But I needed to see it. I needed to cauterize the wound. I tapped the file. It loaded slowly. A grainy black and white scan of a handwritten letter. The stationery was from a cheap motel, the Starlight Inn. Robin, the handwriting was Sylvia's. It was jagged, frantic, missing the elegant cursive loops she had spent years perfecting for country club invitations. I don't know where you are. Henderson won't tell me. I hope you're happy. They took the house today. The bank sent men in cheap suits to change the locks. I had to pack 30 years of my life into 4 suitcases. I'm staying by the highway. It smells like diesel fuel. I could almost smell it. The sharp, nauseating fumes of 18-wheelers rumbling past thin motel walls. Cindy called me from the holding facility yesterday. She sounded like a little girl. She asked for you. She asked if you would pay for a better lawyer for the appeal. I told her you were gone. Arthur always said you were the strong one. He said you had the stomach for the ugly things. I didn't understand what he meant until now. You let your sister walk into a slaughterhouse so you could take the money and run. You aren't Arthur's daughter. You're a parasite. Don't ever contact us again. You are dead to me, Sylvia. I read the letter twice. I waited for the tears. I waited for the guilt to crush my chest, for the phantom pain to seize my left arm and drop me to the kitchen floor. It didn't happen. Instead, a profound, heavy silence settled over me. I looked at the words. You let your sister walk into a slaughterhouse. I hadn't pushed her. She had sprinted past me, shoving me out of the way to get to the door, desperate to claim the butcher's knife for herself. She had wanted the power to crush me, unaware that the mechanism was designed to crush whoever held it. Sylvia was right about one thing. I had the stomach for the ugly things. Surviving an execution required it. I tapped the trash icon at the bottom of the screen. Delete file. Yes, the letter vanished. I went into the settings, found my email account, and permanently deleted it. I factory reset the phone. I watched the screen go black, the Apple logo appearing as the device scrubbed itself clean of Robin Stone's past. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving the resetting phone on the counter, and pushed open the screen door to the patio. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the stone. I walked down the worn wooden steps that led from my patio to the beach. The sand was cool and damp near the waterline, packing firmly under my bare soles. The tide was pulling back, leaving behind tangles of dark green kelp and smooth, water-worn stones. I stopped at the edge of the water. The foam washed over my toes, cold and startling. I remembered the industrial carpet. I remembered the fluorescent lights buzzing like dying insects. I remembered the terrifying absolute finality of my heart, stopping the suffocating darkness that followed. I raised a hand and pressed my palm flat against the center of my chest. Beneath the warm skin, beneath the ribs, a muscle contracted and released. It was a strong, steady rhythm, unbothered, unburdened. I wasn't a parasite. I was a survivor. Arthur had tried to bury me in his tomb to keep his legacy alive. Cindy had tried to lock the door behind me, but I had dug my way out with my bare hands, taking the only thing of actual value they possessed. My life. I lowered my hand. I took a deep breath of the salt air, filling my lungs, until they ached with the sheer volume of it. The wind picked up, rustling the dry palm fronds on the ridge behind me. I turned away from the setting sun and walked back toward my house. I was hungry. It was time to make dinner. The dead could stay dead. I had living to do. If Robin's journey from a crushed corporate scapegoat to a ruthless survivor resonated with you, drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Would you have warned Cindy, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more deeply human, gritty rebirth stories, where karma doesn't just knock, it breaks down the door. Share this video with someone who loves a dark, satisfying twist. Your support keeps these stories coming.